Okay, so this next presentation certainly gives me a great deal of personal satisfaction, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this next guy. And so it kind of closes the circle for me quite nicely. Simon Dudley inadvertently started the AVusergroup in the late 1990s, something like that, and it probably wasn't even called that then, was it? But it was fundamentally a networking group of end users in this industry, and it really just remained just that for many, many years. There was no sponsorship, there was no presentations, it was just a group of us that used to get together on a regular basis and network, and Simon was the guy that pulled it all together. And then Simon moved on. When did you join Life Size, when they started? 2003. So Simon had probably been doing this for 6 or 7 years by then, just because his clients wanted him to, and because it was a great forum. And then Mike McCarthy took over the lead role and introduced sponsorship and generated funds, and now we're able to do some great things like, you know, trips to ISE and the AV Awards and whatever else. And I was just keeping an eye on LinkedIn just recently, and I see that Simon had moved on from his job at Life Size, decided to take a bold step and start his own company. And then when I saw what his company was about, I thought it was a really, really interesting idea, and got hold of him through LinkedIn. We spoke, and I just thought it would be a fantastic thing for Simon to come and present this to the user group. A, he knows so many of us and he knows what we're about, but B, just because this is a bit different and it's a bit special. So I don't want to sway the vote at the end, but this is going to be my favourite presentation today. Simon, over to you.
Thanks, Owen. I appreciate your help, my friend. And yeah, no pressure then. I thought Kevin's was excellent, and he said half my point, so maybe I should just leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time. I'd also actually like to thank Owen on a personal level. This sounds like a real love fest now, but thank you very much, Owen. You helped me out a lot. I haven't been back in the UK for 2.5 years, and I was back in the UK 2.5 years ago for reasons you don't want to have to be back in the country for. So this was a wonderful opportunity to come over and sort a whole bunch of personal things out, as well as come and do this talk. And haven't you grown, by the way? The first user group, we had 6 of us for breakfast. And I said to actually the lady who's still Owen's boss, Tina Kemp and Dave and a whole bunch of other folks, you can come along and you can listen to what all the other organisations that will be at this meeting will say, but you cannot send anyone other than you. If you send a lackey, they will not be invited. And everyone moaned and everyone said, well, I don't want to give a talk, but I want to hear what everyone else is up to. And everyone said it. And I said, you must speak for 20 minutes about something that you're doing. And no one spoke for less than an hour. And it started as breakfast. We did it through lunch, and half of us also went to dinner. And it turned into a fantastic group, because every time it would be something. I don't think we ever had one as wonderful as this. This is an absolutely gorgeous facility, but or faculty, as I should now say, as I live in Texas. And we would get everyone to show off their board. Oh, we've got a new boardroom. Oh, we'd like to see that. And we went to Morgan Stanley's boardroom and Credit Suisse's boardroom and Barclays' boardroom, and we got some very nice lunches. So what I want to talk about today is what I'm up to. I'm up to a bunch of things. I'm doing a bunch of consultancy for different organisations. I've written a book, and people have read it, and actually some people like it. So quite amazing. I did a thing on Amazon, which you can talk to me in the bar about this if you'd like to. On the other Sunday, I did a promotion on the book, and we sold 21,000 copies in an afternoon. I didn't sign them all. Luckily, they're all on the Kindle. So, and people are reading it, and it's pretty good. So, I think, but I'm biased. So the book is about these things called Excession events. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell. I'm no Harvard MBA. In fact, I have 4 CSEs and 2 O-levels, and left school at 17. But I did notice a trend. I've been in IT since 1986, and every industry I would join, whether it was word processors, well, that was then replaced by PCs. And then I did colour printers, and that was replaced by really, really cheap colour printers. Then I did other things like video conferencing, and everything I did, I worked for Harvard Graphics for a while, and that got replaced by Power. Every industry I joined, the success criteria in that business would change and I would go and have to find another job. And after doing that for 28 years, you start noticing these trends. The strange thing is that businesses don't. As a general principle, what happens is that businesses have this sense that next year will look like this year, but it will look 10% better. Very few businesses go, it's going to be 10% worse next year. They'll say it's flat and then fire 15% of the people. But what they don't say is the business will be 10 times better, or they don't say the game's up, our business model doesn't work anymore, we'll get our coat. Unless, of course, they're Barnes & Noble, for example. And apologies, I'm a bit out of touch, so I'm not going to use very many UK examples, but the US ones I think will work with us. So an Excession event is defined as a set of circumstances where the success criteria in a market change. And those are happening more and more regularly, and they're happening not just in IT, they're happening to every industry. And one of the things that businesses are not doing is thinking about what these new answers are like. And what the book's about, and what I'm going to talk about today, is that answers aren't very much use to you anymore. And I'll explain why. So let's get the first point out the way. All these companies have gone to the wall, and everyone has this very interesting habit of saying, yeah, but they're idiots, weren't they? They didn't see streaming video. They didn't see digital photography. They didn't see iPhones coming. The reality is none of those companies were badly run. All of them, every day, made entirely logical, reasonable decisions, right until the point where they didn't. People say, Kodak, they failed to see digital photography. It's not true at all. Digital photography was invented at Kodak in 1976. And people say, yeah, but they're idiots, they didn't take advantage of it. The reality is, without a whole bunch of other technologies, a digital camera would be useless to you. So in 1976, as an example, Kodak invented the first CMOS chip, so you could receive and process digital data on a camera. Great. But what Kodak didn't do is build high-quality small screens. So you could take a picture, but you couldn't see what you're taking the picture of on the camera. They didn't do memory, and the memory sizes would have been so big the camera would be the size of this lectern, or bigger. They didn't do anything with batteries, and batteries in the 70s would have been totally useless for a digital camera. They didn't do the processors required to do anything with the image. They didn't do computer screens that once you got it off the machine, off the camera, however you did that, you couldn't put it on a big screen to look at it. They didn't do screens. They didn't do color printers. They didn't do hard disks, and they didn't do Facebook. And without all of those things, digital photography is pretty useless. Oh, I took some lovely digital camera pictures. Well, what are they like? I don't know. We can never look at them. It's not much use. And so this applies to all these organizations. They make reasonable decisions right until the point where what success looks like in their market went away so quickly that they were blindsided by it. And the talk is about not only that these things happen, and not only that your organizations may be at risk from it, but you also personally may be at risk from it. And I'll be talking about the future of jobs as well. And what I try to do with this, the whole point in the talk, is for people to help understand that you can't know what the answer is going to be, but you can have a mindset that enables you to survive these big tsunamis of change that come in. And that's what the book and this presentation is about. So let's talk about cell phones. First, so one of the advantages of not actually going to school was that you started work early. So in 1986, when I was 7, I started selling cell phones. And they were about £10,000 each. You put the car kit in. I remember my boss put one of these things in, a Panasonic 5A. It cost more than his XR3i, which dates everyone and everything. But if I got in my time machine from the year, well, from today, and I got in my Doctor Who TARDIS, and I put my iPhone in my pocket, and I came up to any of you in the year 2000, and I went back and I said, so I've got the best-selling phone in the world in my pocket. What do you think you could tell me about it? And it's from 15 years from now. Well, you would look at phones like this. This is a Motorola Razr. 452 million of those were made. Where are they now? They're in desk drawers around the world, it appears. No one ever threw a Razr away. They threw every other phone in the world away, but not the Razr. And you could realistically say, right, mid-80s to the year 2000, so I would think I can tell you 4 things about a cell phone from the year 2015. It will be very small. I will go for the size of a credit card. That would be useful, fit in my wallet. And I go, okay, what else could you tell me about a phone from 15 years from now? The battery will last forever, a month. Right, what else could you tell me? The thing will be indestructible, because we've all thrown a phone down in the year 2000, thrown it down a railway platform running for a train, and just picked it up and gone, oh, it's got a scratch. And Nokia or Motorola will make it. And I would say, no. No, in the year 2015, the world's best-selling phone, the battery barely lasts a day. It's twice the size of your Motorola Razr or your Nokia 6210. If you drop it 2 feet, it will smash and it will cost you 200 quid to replace the screen. And Nokia and Motorola are both bankrupt. And you would look at me and go, how is that progress? And then I would pull out my iPhone 6 and I would show you Clash of Clans or whatever it is, whatever the latest game, and I'd show you email and I'd show you the internet, and you would go, that is what I want. Now what's interesting is that lots of the people who were the big players when the iPhone came out in 2007, I think, 2006, when that came out, Steve Ballmer, one of the great technologists of our time, if you may actually want to cut that from the tape, but the CEO of Microsoft, certainly for many years, and you think a bright lad, said they will sell none, and the CEO of Nokia said it's irrelevant, it will be 2% of the market. Let's hope he'd already sold his shares by that point. Now, these things happen all the time, these changes, and we don't notice them. This one happened to my family. The wheel, the single simplest machine in the entire universe, has gone through one enormously fundamental change in 3,000 years. If you turn around to my grandparents at the turn of the 20th century, and they were very successful wheelwrights, made pretty decent money, had servants, big houses, lots of money, and you said to them in 1900, in 25 years from now, your business will be bankrupt because no one will buy wooden wheels anymore, they would stare at you like you've just come off a spaceship. Because wheels hadn't really changed since, well, at least 1000 BC. So how could what do you mean the wheels going away? The point was, of course, that as soon as you've got cars, you've got steel wheels and rubber tyres. So what success looks like for the single simplest machine in the universe has utterly changed. They ended up living in 2 rooms in King's Cross in total poverty by 1930. Which is a bit annoying for me because it would have been nice to be part of that, you know, major money family. If only I could go back. But they couldn't win. You see, the point was, they made wooden wheels. They were wheelwrights. They couldn't turn around and go, if we said to them, well, what business are you in? They'd say, well, we're in the wheel business. The reality is they weren't in the wheel business. They were in the working wood business that just happened to make wheels. And they also were in the finance business, right? No one went in and bought a cart on HP or put it on their American Express card in 1900. You rented these things from the people who sold them to you. Because there was no hire purchase, there was no loans. So in reality, what they were was in the finance business. So one of the primary things to do to solve accession events or to survive them is to understand what business you're actually in. Plenty of people make the decision they're in the phone business, and a Nokia 6210 is probably the best phone ever made. And what happened was Apple redefined what a phone was, or what the supercomputer you hold in your hand. That's what Apple made. They made a supercomputer, and one of the apps was telephony. And my 2 boys, I don't think they've ever used the phone facility, ever. They use text. So this happens all the time. I've got lots of graphs like this, but on the grounds this isn't a 2-hour presentation. Is it? It's not a 2-hour presentation. 2%, a bit over 2% of all the people who worked in 1850 were blacksmiths. You know how many blacksmiths there are now? None. There's about 10. But it doesn't count anymore. You look at secretaries, you look at car mechanics. By the way, car mechanics are dropping precipitously because no one fixes cars anymore. I mean, some of us, Ian Muir, I'm looking at you, but, and also because you're a car nut, but you're also of a generation where in your 20s and 30s you probably spent the weekend repairing a car. I know you do. You do it for fun then. You had to do. Now you did it for necessity then. Well, these days it's not true. Cars don't break anymore. Even there's no terrible cars.
They do, but they don't get fixed by somebody that actually knows how to fix it. You get fixed by somebody you can use.
Yes, because he opens the bonnet and he looks underneath and it's like a Japanese radio. It says no user serviceable parts inside. So, these things happen all the time and we think it's not going to happen to us. Now, there was a thing in the BBC this week. I've been in the country 3 or 4 days, and there was a thing in the Daily Mail, so it must be true, that over the next 20 years, 33% of all the jobs that exist today will go to automation. They will go to robots, they will go to AI. Actually, if you read the report, they say over half. And if you do the thing on the BBC, they are crazy when they say things like, driver, not very likely to be made redundant in the next 20 years. Are they mad? Have they not noticed Google cars? Google cars done 4.5 million kilometres. They've crashed 12 times, and 11 of the 12 times were people crashing into the Google car. And the other one was someone stepping out in front of it when it didn't expect them to. You can't blame the car for that. So, a lot of jobs are going to be going away. And it's amazing how quickly these things are happening. See, we're living in a world now where we're going from near to impossible. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the concept of a self-driving car was rated by almost every computer scientist who had looked at the problem as almost certainly we will never have a self-driving car. It's too hard. There's too much going on. Renault announced last week that they're putting $50 million. That's all. That's all they're putting in. $50 million and they'll have a self-driving car in 4 years. Because what we've got is a world where going from close to impossible to trivial is happening at an incredible rate. And I'll explain that because of the concept of geometric growth. Now, in this case, I'm using geometric growth in the same way that Moore's law uses it. And Moore's law defines that every 18 months, processing power doubles. Well, for the same cost. Well, if you double every 18 months, you go up by a factor of 10 every 5 years. So in 5 years, it's 10 times better than it is now. In 10 years, it's 100 times better than it is now. In 15, it's 1,000 times better, and in 20 it's 10,000 times better than it is now. So anything you use and you look at it and go, well, it's not very good at it, well, by the time you've got the next version of the software out, it'll be incredibly good at it. Now, one of the problems we all have as the wetware in this equation is that humans are terrible at understanding big numbers. In fact, numbers above about 20, we don't really understand. It's one of the problems with the carbon debate, by the way. Everyone will tell you that this power station or that bus or that cow produces this amount of gas every year, and no one can imagine it. So I thought I would give you an example. I wrote a magazine article about this, but I wanted to talk about geometric growth. And the story, it's an apocryphal story, but the story goes that an inventor goes and invents the game of chess. And he shows it to the local monarch, to the local emperor, and he says, the emperor is so impressed, he says, I'd like to buy this game from you. What is your price? And the inventor says, I would like 1 grain of rice for the first square on the chessboard, 2 grains of rice for the second square, 4 grains of rice for the third, 8 for the fourth, 16 for the fifth. and so on. The emperor said, that seems reasonable. How much rice can that be? I mean, it's tiny, isn't it? 1 grain of rice. Well, let's look at it. So if you go across the board, by the time it gets to the 17th square, you've got a kilogram of rice. 1 kilo of rice is put on the 17th square. By the time you get to the 28th square, it's a ton of rice. By the time we get to the 44th square, it's 55,000 tons of rice. The emperor's getting a bit nervous at this point. By the 57th square, it's the entire world's production of rice for a year. That's 750 million tons. By the time it's 64th square, I can guarantee you the emperor has run out of rice. It's 200 years worth of all the production in the world. Now the question we have to ask ourselves is, for Moore's law in compute, where are we on this chessboard, and how many squares does it have? Because it's probably not 64. And the processing speed, the gap, the step change is becoming so fast, it's going to disrupt society far more than anything else in the next 20 years. Every single presenter so far today has talked about software is eating the world. It's eating the world because of this effect. And effectively, the internet, we now have one computer. It is the internet. And everything you use is simply a window to the internet. If you use a computer, you've got a laptop computer, it's not connected to the internet, it's like a really terrible typewriter. And I say that because you can't even take anything off it and hand it to someone. You have to hand them the whole laptop. Right? They're terrible things. So it's the thing to consider throughout the rest of this presentation, that the rate of change is shocking. And the disruption to all industries will be enormous. So the first thing we've got to consider is, and of course I'm an ex-sales guy, and therefore I have a sales mentality, or often did, tried not to. So salespeople, and I speak as a pretty experienced one, are not the greatest thinkers. That's not what they do. Think of them like Marines. Run up the beach, take the flag, kill the other guy. It's their job. So what they have this nasty habit of doing, and most people do this to an extent, is when things start getting tough, they go, well, I'll work harder. Well, that's a really terrible idea. Working harder, maybe you'll all be pleased to know this, working harder is the worst strategy you can have. You see, one of the things that working harder allows you to do is stop thinking. I'm working so hard, I'm pedaling like crazy, nose to the grindstone, I'll work my way out of this. The rate of change in industry today is so vast that you cannot outcompete a guy by working harder. The 10% better next year is not good enough. You'll lose to the guy who actually sat back, analysed what he did, and thinks, actually, why don't we just do this an entirely different way? And the amount of compute power out there now is transforming all these opportunities. So first lesson is do not work harder. It's a fool's errand. The next thing to talk about is this nasty problem we have that we believe in facts as a society, generally speaking. The trouble with facts is they have this nasty habit of not being true after a while. They erode. There's actually a book out, it's pretty decent, called The Half-Life of Facts. So I've split facts into 6 levels of facts, okay? There are irrefutable level 1 facts, facts that you cannot deny. Pi is 3.14. The Earth goes around the sun, right? That sort of thing. Those are irrefutable facts. Then you've got level 2 facts, which would be peer-reviewed papers that lots of people have had the opportunity to pick at. So that would be mostly anything out of Science or Nature or the Lancet or, peer-reviewed, decent quality material. Then there will be what most of the world uses today as its source of fact, which is Wikipedia facts. right, which is basically a subjective position that most of us agree on. If you think about it, if you go to the corners of the internet, if you go to a subject that isn't or is highly politically orientated, or it's a corner case that not many people are interested in, Wikipedia is not going to do you well. But if it's a broad-based thing about something that many people are interested in, there's not much controversy on, Wikipedia is excellent. Then there's level 4 facts, also known as Daily Mail facts. And these are the bloke down the pub said facts. These are basically subjective positions of one person. And they're not much use. Then there's level 5 facts, represented here by Pinocchio, and they're lies. And then there's Wikipedia, there's Illuminati facts, which are things that purport to be true or a fact that plainly aren't true at all. You know, we didn't go to the moon, that everyone's got a lizard living in them, you know, Scientology, that sort of thing. Any Thetans in the audience? I rest my case. Now, the problem with facts is you have this nasty habit of making decisions based on facts. And the problem with that is, as the facts change, does your opinion? Everyone would say, of course it doesn't. That's why we always read the newspaper that fits our political ideology, because we wouldn't want to read something that actually might disturb us. Oh, well, they came up, well, that's not true. Why not? Well, because I don't like the ramifications of that. Another point with Excession events is you've got to be prepared to face things you don't like the look of. Because just because you don't like them doesn't mean they're not true. So let me give you a couple of examples. This one's been in the media a fair amount recently, so I guess most people here will know this. How many planets are there in the solar system? Is it 8? Is it 9? Is it 10? We're all educated people. Someone could shout out. Don't feel... We won't point too hard if you like. Oh, and you've got a vocal cord? There's 8. Yes, there is now, but they are now petitioning people to try and get Pluto put back in. They will fail because it doesn't apply. But the point is, for most of our lives, for most of us, there were 9 planets for most of our lives. Next one, dinosaurs. What colour are dinosaurs? No one knows. Are they scaly reptiles? No. It looks very likely now that they were all covered in feathers. And they've got feathered dinosaurs that they found recently from 250 million years ago. Another fact we all know is that birds evolved from dinosaurs. That doesn't seem to be true now either. It looks like birds evolved at the same time as dinosaurs. So creatures like sparrows existed at the same time as Tyrannosaurus rex and probably did for about 100 million years. That's really interesting. Now, for most of us, I suspect we do not make many of our decisions, whether dinosaur in our lives, around how many planets there are or how many feathers dinosaurs had or did not have. But they're just examples. The third one was what causes stomach ulcers, right? We're in the College of Physicians, a perfect example of this. What causes, is it spicy food and stressful life? Is that what causes stomach ulcers? Anyone? It's acid. Right. Thank you, sir. That's excellent. It's utterly wrong, and has been utterly wrong for the purpose. The gentleman said acid. It's not acid at all. And that, by the way, hasn't been true for 25... Well, it's never been true, but they've known it not to be true for 25 years. It took the medical fraternity 17 years to accept that stomach ulcers are caused by a bacteria. The man who worked it out actually took a vial of the bacteria to prove that he would get a stomach ulcer, and it nearly killed him because his entire gut became one enormous stomach ulcer. You give someone 4 days' worth of antibiotics, you will cure them of stomach ulcers. So if you had a stomach ulcer 20 years ago, and perhaps even last week, depending on what you think the facts are, right? And I'm not really taking the mickey, but it's an example of, you make facts based on wrong data. Now, the next thing I would argue for an Excession event is be careful with your facts, because one, we have this nasty habit of picking the ones that fulfill our existing prejudices. And secondly, we do have this habit of not being up to date. So I would argue that if you want to know the answer to anything, and if you have teenage children, by the way, it's both very annoying and a lifesaver, is they say, well, how does that X happen? We all just pull out our phone and whoever gets it first, and it's one of my boys with Siri on his phone, always gets the answer to it. I try and get him to do maths in his head. Immediately I said, well, if it's 60 months at 8% interest, how much money would that be? And he just picks out the phone and asks the question of Siri. Of course, and it always tells him, always tells him the answer. So we as a society need to move away from knowing answers. In fact, I would argue that we've got to be much better at questioning our existing prejudices and our existing facts as we think they are. And then when the facts change, so must our opinion. Anything else is dogma. So, another thing we do a nasty habit of is we have a nasty habit of all seeing the duck. Who's seen the duck? Hands up for ducks. All right. Who's seen the rabbit? Okay, of course, you're all wrong. No duck or rabbit ever looked like that. Very badly formed, either of those. The point is that we are pattern machines. That's why we see clouds and someone goes, that's Elvis, or whatever. It isn't. But the point is that we are genetically and evolutionarily built to see patterns in things when there is no pattern. So Taleb, thingamajig, the fellow who wrote, Nassim Taleb, he wrote Black Swan and Anti-Fragile, two almost entirely impenetrable books on this topic. But if you can get through them, they're worth a read. He talks about how we do this all the time. We have a bias for a position because it fits our existing patterns. The point I'm bringing up is be careful of these. You see, we're all built to do it because we've all got ancestors, and 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 years ago, one of our ancestors was walking through the forest and went, oh, there's a tiger in the forest. Oh, no, there wasn't. It was just some leaves and things, thank God. And they walk away. Didn't kill him. The one who walked down the road and went, didn't see a tiger. He's the one who got eaten. We're not evolved from him. We're evolved from the guy who saw patterns all the time. So be aware that patterns can be a problem for us because we're built to see them. So be careful about seeing them. They may be there, but often they're not. So my slide went slightly wrong. Here's another problem we all have. We have enormously strong opinions on things we know nothing about. You know the slightest thing about the refugee crisis. The amount of moral outrage one way or the other is enormously strong. Who knows what's actually going on? What should happen is that we start not having any strong opinion on things we know nothing about, and as our knowledge of a topic gets better, then our strength of opinion on it should get better. But that's not what happens at all. What actually happens is that you end up with people who know nothing, have very strong opinions, and by the way, you're seeing this in the American electoral system, right? Donald Trump knows nothing, but he's very strong opinionated on topics. That's quite appealing to people. That can be pretty scary, both for the future of the Western world, but I won't get too much into the politics of that. But more importantly, if you as a business start making decisions without knowing topics well, then that can get a bit risky. The other point, what actually happens that you'll find is that when people know a topic very well, and you ask them black or white, yes or no, they can't. They always give you a nuanced answer, because the real knowledge is always in the shades of grey on any topic. So be aware of that. Again, these are psychological issues that we all go through individually and therefore as companies. So if we're aware these things happen, we can hopefully hedge against them. So the 10th man is a concept, a psychological or a management technique that the Israeli Defense Force codified after 1973. Israel has not exactly had a happy 20th century, let's be honest. They've had some pretty rough times of it. And what they realized was, one of the things that was getting in their way was that they would build their senior management, whether it's in the military or in the civilian administration, they would come to a decision and everyone would agree to the position and they would move forward. The problem with that was no one was arguing the counter case. You see, often, because we've all come from a similar background, and we all come from a similar background because we hire people who look and sound and have similar opinions to ourselves, because after all, to a greater or lesser extent, we all think we're a reasonable chap, or chapess. You know, well, I'm pretty good at my job, so I want to hire someone who's like me. Well, everyone does that. Every business has people who think and look and speak and make decisions based on the same set of criteria. So you need to change that. What the 10th man was, the Israeli Defense Force codified it. So they said when the senior management got together, whether it was military or civilian, if they all agreed to a course of action, one of them, at random, would be designated to be the person who argued the counter case, who said, what you're proposing is not true, we will go and find evidence to prove this position wrong. It made their case much stronger. They didn't necessarily need to believe that counter position, but they did need to be able to argue it and build a case around it. And it changed the way that they made decisions as a result. Most companies do not. Most companies have a major flaw with that. One of the things that organisations need to do is be more diverse. And I don't necessarily mean, although it does help, this isn't about political correctness. This is about people from different cultures, different genders, different mindsets are more likely to think differently and potentially see the problem from a different angle. And with the rate of change in business being so fast now, that's becoming a survival strategy rather than a competitive advantage. So let's talk about madness. All CEOs go mad. They all do. In the end of the day, they all do. If they're left too long doing the same job, they have this nasty habit, and it's not their fault. Right? They start earning good money. They surround themselves by people who realise that it's quite good for their career to agree with the CEO. Because after all, if you disagree with the CEO all the time, you're either going to be out the building or not promoted. And so what happens is over a period of time, CEOs start surrounding themselves with yes men. It's easier. They know anyway. They know all the answers. Everyone else is just implementation. CEOs start believing that too. And then they end up with King's New Clothes syndrome. He's so brilliant that only an idiot couldn't see the wonder of the King's New Clothes. We all know the story, you know, the hucksters, probably from McKinsey, come along and tell the king. That's that contract done. This is a live stream. They come along and tell the king how brilliant he is, and he gets his nice suit, and they tell him and all the acolytes tell him how wonderful it is, and the small boy in the parade comes out and says, "He's not wearing any clothes," and everyone screams and shouts, don't they? And there's chaos, and the hucksters are thrown out of town, and that's exactly what doesn't happen. The boy says, "He's not wearing any clothes," and they behead the boy. Because everyone, I'm pleased to see that you can all laugh about child murder, that's very good of you. But it's what happens, because the CEO because he's invested in that decision, and that's a real problem. Because if he's invested in that position, the only way out of it is for him to resign. He's not going to resign in front of an 8-year-old boy. And businesses do this stuff all the time. So what you need to do is build a concept of a 10th man. In fact, if you think about it, or you read about it, you understand that all the courts of Europe had the concept of a 10th man in the form of a jester. The jester's job in all European courts in the Middle Ages was to speak truth to power. They were the lowest man who could say anything, because his opinion didn't matter. And so when the courtiers came and were sycophantic to the king, or they whispered in his ear how wonderful he was and his ego started inflating, then the jester would come along and often through comedy would prick the bubble of pomposity. They did it too in Rome, by the way. When the new Caesar would go through the streets of Rome and all the people would be cheering, they codified it that a slave would stand behind Caesar and whisper in his ear as he goes through the city, "You are but a mortal man." How many organizations now have a jester, have a contrarian, have a 10th man, have a slave on the back of the chariot? Not many. They need to have it more. It matters. The organizations like Nokia who said, "Oh, the iPhone's nothing." How many people at Nokia didn't think that and didn't speak up? Well, they were just as fired as all the people who didn't believe it. It's a major problem. Now, one of the advantages of these changes is that they're not instantaneous. The world does not suddenly have a new thing. It evolves it. And it often evolves it these days with technology by mashing multiple technologies together. We talked earlier about digital cameras. The moment that the digital cameras really took off, once you had Wi-Fi and you had Facebook. Right? Before that, digital cameras were, you took a lot of pictures, you deleted the ones you didn't want, then you printed the others. That was basically, they were better than well, they weren't better, they were an equivalent of a film camera in some senses, but they certainly wasn't a major shift in the way that they were operated. After Facebook, there was. People don't even take their nice camera. Well, I take my nice camera and take pictures, and I'll upload them all 2 weeks from now. I don't want to upload them in 2 weeks from now. I want to take a picture of Big Ben at 8 o'clock in the morning and send it to everyone in Texas and say, "Ha-ha, I'm in London." That fundamentally changes the way cameras work. Now, the point is that all these technologies exist in markets, and if you're looking out, you could potentially see how they could all add up to something greater than the sum of the parts. But most people don't look. I'd recommend we all start looking more, because those mashups of technology matter a lot. And you don't have to be great. You just need to have your eyes open. So let's talk about the difference between specialists and generalists. Specialists is something that we've basically had since the time of the American Revolution. At that time, an intellectual such as Ben Franklin, for example, could basically be a scientist of all science. He had about 400 books in his library. A contemporary of his, of course, would have had, some of the biggest libraries were something like 4,000 or 5,000 books. Thomas Jefferson had the largest collection, and that became the start of the Library of Congress. And those guys could know pretty much everything there was to know. But after that date, if you wanted to be any good at a thing, you needed to specialise. And what's happened now is that we've got lots and lots of specialists. We had lots of people who were very good at cameras, lots of other people who are good at phones, other people who are good at wireless, other people who are good at batteries, other people who are good at memory, and they all built different products. And actually it took a visionary, a generalist, and not good at anything, but very good at seeing how they can connect together in the form of Steve Jobs, to work out that actually if I pull all these things together, I'll have something that's 10 times better than all the pieces. So a specialist is defined as someone who knows more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. And a generalist is someone who knows less and less about more and more until they know nothing about everything, taken to its logical conclusion. I would argue, and by the way, for most of us, it's probably the die is cast. Our careers, I suspect, obviously Mr. Muir's going to be going for another 40 years, probably the way the last 40 years has gone, but many of us, we're not going to rechange our careers. But for our children, if we have children under 25, being a generalist probably has more legs than being a specialist. Certainly the idea of seeing how you can pat numerous technologies together, which is becoming ever easier in the world which is just software, is becoming very important. So, question for all of you, and I'm sure you've probably thought about these, is because of the speed of change is so fast, technologies are becoming redundant before you've even installed them. I hear the titter, so that's happened then. So what do you do if the installation process takes longer than the life cycle of the product? It didn't used to be true, did it? You put a big telephony environment in, Owen Ellis, I'm looking at you, 20 years ago, and you keep it for 15 years, and it would be a 3-year process. And now you're going to put in a new phone system or new phone technology, and you can't tell me what the bank's going to be doing in 2 years from now, because you don't know, because no one knows, because the rate of change is so fast. So what do? Well, you do a couple of things. I would argue in the modern era, and I know for some of the global 500s in this room, this may not be entirely possible, but where you can, you do as you do with cars and aircraft and other things. If it flies, floats or functions, rent it by the hour. If you do that, then what you're now doing is transforming the conversation. You are moving from a what does it do to how does it do it to what does it do for me. And that does change the experience. Now, it changes the experience for both the manufacturers and the suppliers and for you as customers. And that matters because the relationship with your suppliers is going to change. Finally, you're drinking this by its IT as a service. Well, that fundamentally changes the relationship you have with your suppliers. And you need to think about it. You go, well, I don't care what my supplier does. But you do at some level because it matters to you how they do business with you. Everything's going to get free. Well, always remember, if the product's free, you're the product. As our pig friends there probably haven't worked out. But they were lovely. So this is one of the things that's happening. We've got our graph of doom here. These are our danger zones. What's happening? This is mainly for manufacturers or suppliers, but it matters to you if you're a consumer. You've basically got your 3 forms of business. You've got your sales-led business. This is when a besuited, highly respected, understandable, in theory at least, well paid, if not good quality, sales guy comes and meets you. And the product is very expensive and it's not very ubiquitous, right? It's rare. You're buying a 60,000 handset telephony solution, you're probably going to meet a rep. If, however, you're buying a 10-seat telephony solution, I'm using telephony just as an example, you probably don't have a rep. It's not worth him driving over to see you. So what happens is you buy it over the phone. And then if you get to the really low cost, this is trending towards 0, then you probably buy it online. You probably never speak to someone from the company. And in fact, one of their other customers is the guy who sold it to you. Because you were chatting with some friends and they said, oh, you should get X product because it's really good. And so what manufacturers are often doing, and all the new ones, if you've noticed this, all the new ones use viral marketing. They use this sense of customers selling to customers. No one sold. There's no sales guy for Candy Crush. Right? We're laughing. That's a $100 million business. I think it's a multi-hundred million. There's no sales team. No one's coming around for a chat and a coffee and 3 meetings about your design criteria for Candy Crush. But of course you get 7 messages a day from people trying to get more lives for Candy Crush. It's viral. This is the telephony outbound sales organisation. This is where I used to live, right? The extremely expensive, fantastically good sales guy. The interesting point is that companies, as the product price drops and therefore the ubiquity goes up, you can't make your sales team work harder. Of course, they all think they can. When you say, right, well, we're going to the targets go up by 15% next year, but the prizes have halved. Well, hang on. Now I need to transact 6 times more business than I did last year. I'll just run faster. Well, it doesn't work. So what they need to do is transform their businesses from sales-led to marketing-led and then ultimately to viral or brand-led. During those transitions, lots of companies will fail. And in fact, the best way of disrupting a market is if your competitors are here and you can start in the market here or better still here, you can really take lumps out of these organisations. Skype is a perfect example. Skype built an $8 billion business out of a company that doesn't do, or doesn't make any money, but all of its customers sold to all of its other customers. A lot more people bought Skype than bought Avaya, but Avaya is most certainly up here. Now, as the prices trend, then the relationship organisations like everyone here has with their suppliers will change fundamentally, because you're not going to have a rep, because they can't possibly afford it. You might get someone on a phone, but increasingly you're probably going to get a piece of viral work, or your customers are. The other thing to consider, and this also makes a big difference here, is traditionally you bring the rep in for him to tell you, or her, to tell you about their product and their company and their technology. Well, 60% of the buying process is done before they've even met the supplier these days. Information is so available that the customer has already basically decided much of what they're going to do with a product long before they meet the reps for it. And therefore, most of the time, the rep is just there for either confirmation or they're there for implementation. It fundamentally changes the sales cycle. So you're going to notice, as customers, you're going to notice some of your manufacturers, some of your suppliers are going through these cycles. And you need to be careful of that, because some of them aren't going to make it. It isn't a linear line. These changes are fundamental to the way these businesses work. Hollywood has, for the last 70 years or so, made films in a very interesting way. No one has a job. Suddenly 200 people go and work on The Hobbit for 3 years, and then they don't have a job again. And they're okay about that. And it seems interesting that we're now living in a world where it's actually often easier for a company to build a product and then disband the company completely and start a new company, potentially with the same people in it, but in different seats, than it is to move one business from one business model or one business product to another one. The transition's harder than just breaking it all up. You know, the team who built The Hobbit didn't go and build The Martian. Probably many of the same people were involved, but they did them in a different configuration. So what's going to happen is that some of the biggest disruption, of course, in the finance industry is happening at Shoreditch Roundabout, and that's happening by people who are getting together for 2 or 3 years, building a product, moving on, doing another one. And traditionally, you'd have an entity of a company and people would come in and out of it. Increasingly, you're ending up with what they call a Hollywood model, where the whole company only lasts 3 or 4 years. Now, if you're a big owner of that technology, what do you do when they disband the band, as it were, or the organisation, and go off and do some other things? It's going to fundamentally change the way that you buy things. One of the points would be, of course, if you're renting it, you can move the service more easily. If you've bought all this stuff and they've disbanded, now what do you do? Of course, the point is, I don't know the answers to any of this, which makes my job really easy. I can just really annoy and confuse you and then leave, and you're all like, what do I do? I don't know what you do, but I can give you some ideas of ways to think, and that's as much as... I think if I stood here and say the world is changing at a phenomenal rate and I know all the answers, I think in 6 months from now you could come to me and say, well, you're an idiot, Dudley, you didn't know any of the answers, and I don't. But I do know a way of thinking. One of the last points I want to make is, traditionally, everyone had this little, and I think it's a good idea, by the way, to have the triangle of good, fast, cheap. Are we aware of the triangle of good, fast, cheap? So you can put the red dot anywhere in the triangle. You can have it very fast, but it won't be any good, and it won't be cheap. Or you can have cheap, but it won't be fast, and it won't be good. You can't have it quickly, and it won't be any good. Or you can have really good, but it won't be cheap. So that compromise there is something probably all projects should have, maybe on the front cover, and someone draws an X. Because what customers do, your customers do, I'm sure, is say, I want all of them. It must be good and fast and cheap. And we all groan and know that that's impossible. Increasingly, why this matters to the world is increasingly people are going for fast and cheap. This concept of the minimum viable product. It's good enough that the market will spend money on it. Let's get that out. If that's what you want, then that's fine. But as organisations, like many of the organisations in this room, that's probably not the right compromise. So you need to think about just the mindset of the kind of suppliers you're going to work with. So I'll leave the last thoughts. No, I've got some more, but the real last thought here is Charles Darwin said, it isn't the strongest that survives, nor the most intelligent, it's the one who's most adaptable to change. They're the ones who made it. All of us made it from 4 billion years ago because we were most adaptable to change. The change that we're all going to see in our lives in the next 15 years will dwarf what we saw in the last 15, and that was enormous compared with the 15 years before it. And it's getting kind of crazy. And this whole idea you can go, I'll sit back and wait until it calms down. You're going to be waiting a long time. It isn't going to calm down. I'll leave those. How am I doing on time? I haven't... Oh, good. Okay. I'll leave you with these two. I'll leave you with these two slides. In the next 20 years, London will be utterly transformed. I mean, every city will, but London is a specifically good example. Will be utterly transformed when all of us get rid of our cars. Except for Mr. Muir. And he'll be having to drive his on a track. Because what will happen is that people think self-driving cars is a bit like cruise control. Oh, I'll have my self-driving car and I'll get in it and then I'll drive home. No, you won't. You'll rent it. You won't own a car. What's the point? 95% of the time, your car is sitting there in a car park or it's sat there on your driveway doing one thing, depreciating. So the most important thing that self-driving cars will do is enable you to have the ultimate Uber experience. Why does that matter? 1 in 6 jobs in Britain is involved in the car industry. In America, the single most popular job for a man without an the single most popular job in 46 of the 50 states is truck driver. It's the only job you can do and earn over $100,000 a year and not have a degree. That's pretty sobering. They're not all going to become app developers. So this stuff will fundamentally change our society. I was writing this in the book in April, and I said in the next 5 years we'll have self-driving trucks. And I wrote that one day, and that evening I watched a piece on the news about Mercedes having a self-driving truck, which is now legal in Arizona. And people say, oh, it won't happen in my lifetime. I'll leave you with this. Those two pictures are New York City. That's 1898. That's 1925. What's the difference? Not a single car. Not a single horse. Think about that. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.